President Trump tonight breaking the record for the longest ever State of the Union address, speaking for an hour and 47 minutes. He framed the first year of his second term as a string of victories, even as polls show deep unease about the country's direction. He spent the first part of the speech really touting his economic policies. Then the speech turned combative at times. He assailed Democrats as being crazy. He sought to reclaim parts of his immigration agenda, spotlighting the families who lost relatives to crimes committed by undocumented immigrants. And again, this is a speech that is coming at a time when 6 in 10 Americans say the country is in a worse place than a year ago. We'll watch now as the president departs the chamber. Let's go to our Lisa Desjardins, who, again, has this choice spot in the press gallery just to top the rostrum where President Trump was speaking this evening. And Lisa, Democratic leadership was really intent on not becoming a prop with their reactions to President Trump. They implored Democrats, no signs, no shouting, no reaction. And yet, that's not what we saw from a number of members of Congress, to include Al Green and Congresswoman Tlaib and Omar. What did you see transpire this evening from your position there?
That's right, Jeff. On the one hand, there were far fewer signs and far fewer members shouting out this year than last year. However, there were some prominent members, including especially Representative Ilhan Omar and Representative Rashida Tlaib, who repeatedly shouted out, especially during the section on immigration. At one point, shouting out, Representative Omar shouting out, "You have killed Americans." Another representative, Norma Torres of California, herself an immigrant, stood up with a sign that had the faces of Alex Preddy and Renee Good on it. This was the point that these members were trying to make as the president was asking for funding for DHS. They were trying to make the point that, in their mind, the president and DHS themselves are dangerous. But nonetheless, this is not what Democratic leaders wanted. There was also a button Rashida Tlaib was wearing that had an expletive on it. Another representative, Nanette Barragan of California, had a button saying "liar, liar." So she didn't yell out "liar." Representative Omar did yell out "liar." This is all to say that's not what Democrats wanted, but Democratic leaders. But for Democrats, it was hard for them to sit here and listen without objecting, and clearly some of them slammed on it. As to quickly the themes of the speech, our staff, we've been counting all the different sections of this, and it was economy, 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 and immigration, with some foreign affairs in there as well.
Lisa, tell us a little bit more about the reaction you saw from Republican lawmakers in the chamber as well. We noticed a few moments of bipartisan applause, certainly for the gold-winning U.S. men's hockey team, but also for families there who'd lost loved ones when there were medals awarded to various folks as well. I noticed the longest applause line, at least that stood out to us watching here, was when the president mentioned a line about the priority being to protect American citizens, not, in his words, illegal aliens. Did that stand out to you in the chamber?
It did. It did. That was a loud and long bout of applause from Republicans, but at that same time, Democrats generally did not applaud that line. They, I think, essentially were probably thinking they didn't want to take the bait, but the president remarked on that they weren't standing and applauding for that. There was, toward the end, far more bipartisan applause than I expected, and it began as the president was talking, for example, about bringing Israeli hostages home, then also with talking about not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. There was a lot of bipartisan applause during that section. But otherwise, this really was a very partisan received speech. I will also say for Republicans, there was one section that I noticed almost no one was reacting until the very end, and that was the section on tariffs. I saw Republicans looking down, looking around. Throughout the rest of the speech, they were pleased, they were chuffed, they were, on the edge of their seat, mostly enjoying this very long speech. But during the tariff section, I saw the opposite. I saw them looking like they wanted that section to end as soon as possible.
Let's go to our White House correspondent, Liz Landers, who is just outside the chamber there in Statuary Hall. Liz, I know you've been working your sources all evening as the president has been speaking. What are you hearing from Republicans, from White House aides, about how the speech landed this evening?
Jeff, I'm actually talking right off camera here is Congressman Bacon from Nebraska, Republican, and I was asking him his reaction to the speech. He said there was a lot of good. He said he was really glad to hear the president focus heavily on the economy. He said at moments that it was a little unnecessarily antagonistic towards the Democrats, and you heard Lisa mention that, the reaction in the chamber, some of the outbursts that you heard from the Democrats. But overall, Congressman Bacon here nodding his head to the side. And we know that Republicans, White House aides in particular, have been really emphasizing to the president to hone in on this message of the economy. I heard that White House Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair had that meeting last week with Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, a bunch of Republican allies, saying that the economy and affordability is the message going into this midterm cycle. And we heard really the first hour of this speech focused heavily on that. As Lisa was talking about there, towards the end, we heard the president talking about some of what he was touting as foreign policy accomplishments there. And in particular, I thought the part about Iran was quite interesting. The president almost making the case right now to the American people as to why he may be building up military forces in the region there, saying that he will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So focusing heavily on that domestic agenda, which the White House has very much wanted the president to refocus on as we are heading into the midterms here in November. Jeff.
All right, so Liz Landers reporting there from Capitol Hill. Back here at the desk with our panel, we're awaiting in just a few minutes, of course, the Democratic response. And Faz Shakir, I'll turn to you first here in terms of what you just heard from the president. How should Governor Abigail Spanberger respond?
Well, if anyone was hunting or wanting something new from the president tonight, they didn't get it. You heard a lot of a tired act, in my view. Obviously, Republicans probably feel pleased about it because it was red meat for them. But for many Americans who are saying, hey, has the president recalibrated in any way? Is he coming forward with a different kind of agenda, having witnessed the last year that didn't really act to me? He didn't give you much to work on. And if you look, I was keeping track during the course of the speech, what was base and what was persuasion for him. There was very little, the hockey team, the great effort to try to bring people together. But after that, there was really not much of an effort to speak to people with whom he might have disagreement right now.
Tiffany, how'd you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was exactly what I anticipated. I think he showed that the Democrats are completely out of touch. He started with a World War II veteran. He ended with a World War II veteran. I think kind of like bringing it home, bringing it back to why we are great in this country. I thought it was interesting how he absolutely pointed out and made sure the American people understood that every single Democrat voted against his historic tax cuts, made that a very, very clear point in the very beginning, which I think was important, and that they wanted an increase in taxes. They wanted, to see prices rise for the American people. And then I feel like he really pointed out issues that are widely accepted and supported by the majority of Americans. He talked about the Pass and Stop the Insider Trading Act. He talked about the Delilah Law to ban illegal aliens from getting commercial driver's license. He talked about Save America Act, the voting ID laws, which majority of Americans are behind. And then he pointed out how the Democrats sat there and they didn't support it. I thought it was brilliant. I thought that was a very smart play to show the American people what he is working on and what he will fight for them.
Kevin Madden, your quick reaction, about a minute left before we go hear from Governor Spanberger.
Well, I think I would agree this was the president at his best. I think, yes, he was very combative, but he was also very engaging. You could tell he really enjoyed giving this speech. He enjoyed this opportunity to talk directly to the American public. The one other thing, too, I'd say is that in the 2026 frame, that this is against the backdrop of midterm elections only 9 months away, the president really focused on immigration. I think he believes that having lost a lot of independents and some trending support the wrong way for him, that's the way to get those independent voters back. That's how to get that MAGA coalition that helped him in 2024. And ultimately, he expects will help his party in these midterms.
All right, well, our panel is going to stay with us all night, and we are going to shift our focus now to Virginia because tonight's Democratic response is coming from Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, who was just elected in November. She's speaking tonight from Colonial Williamsburg.
Good evening and welcome to historic Williamsburg. We are gathered here in the chambers of the House of Burgesses. In 1705, the people of the Virginia colony gathered here to take on the extraordinary task of governing themselves. Before there was a Declaration of Independence, a Constitution, or a Bill of Rights, there were people in this room. The people who served here ultimately dreamed of what a new nation, unlike anything the world had ever seen, could be. The United States was founded on the idea that ordinary people could reject the unacceptable excesses of poor leadership, band together to demand better of their government, and create a nation that would be an example for the world. And this year, as we celebrate 250 years since America declared our independence from tyranny, I can think of no better place to speak to you as we reflect on the current state of our union. Tonight, as we watched our nation's lawmakers gather for a joint session of Congress, we did not hear the truth from our president. So let's speak plainly and honestly. And let me ask you, the American people watching at home, 3 questions. Is the president working to make life more affordable for you and your family? Is the president working to keep Americans safe both at home and abroad? Is the president working for you? As I campaigned for governor last year, I traveled to every corner of Virginia, and I heard the same pressing concern everywhere. Costs are too high in housing, healthcare, energy, and childcare. And I know these same conversations are being had all across this country. Because since this president took office last year, his reckless trade policies have forced American families to pay more than $1,700 each in tariff costs. Small businesses have suffered, farmers have suffered, some losing entire markets. Everyday Americans are paying the price. And even though the Supreme Court struck these tariffs down 4 days ago, the damage to us, the American people, has already been done. Meanwhile, the president is planning for new tariffs, another massive tax hike on you and your family. And Republicans in Congress, they remain unwilling to assert their constitutional authority to stop him. They're making your life harder. They're making your life more expensive. They're even making it more difficult to see a doctor. Rural health clinics in Virginia and across the country are already closing their doors thanks to the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, championed by the president and Republicans in Congress. And tonight, the president celebrated this law, the one threatening rural hospitals, stripping health care from millions of Americans and driving up costs in energy and housing, all while cutting food programs for hungry kids. But here in Virginia, I am working with our state legislature to lower costs and make the Commonwealth more affordable. And it's not just me. Democrats across the country are laser focused on affordability in our nation's capital and in state capitals and communities across America. In the most innovative and exceptional nation in the history of the world, Americans deserve to know that their leaders are focused on addressing the problems that keep them up at night. Problems that dictate where you live, whether you can afford to start a business, or whether you have to skip a prescription in order to buy groceries. So I'll ask again, is the president working to make life more affordable for you and your family? We all know the answer is no. I grew up in a house of service. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a career law enforcement officer. I began my career by following in my father's footsteps as a federal agent, working money laundering and narcotics cases. I worked side by side with local and state police to keep our community safe and to uphold and enforce the law. Law enforcement officers across the country know that it is a unique responsibility to do the serious work of investigating crimes, comforting victims, and making arrests. It's about building trust, and that requires an abiding sense of duty and commitment to community. And yet, our president has sent poorly trained federal agents into our cities where they have arrested and detained American citizens and people who aspire to be Americans. And they have done it without a warrant. They have ripped nursing mothers away from their babies. They have sent children, a little boy in a blue bunny hat, children to far-off detention centers. And they have killed American citizens in our streets. And they have done it all with their faces masked from accountability. Every minute spent sowing fear is a minute not spent investigating murders, crimes against children, or the criminals defrauding seniors of their life savings. Our president told us tonight that we are safer because these agents arrest mothers and detain children. Think about that. Our broken immigration system is something to be fixed, not an excuse for unaccountable agents to terrorize our communities. After working in law enforcement, I continued my career of service as a CIA officer, working undercover to protect the United States and our allies from global threats, terrorism, nuclear weapons, and the aggression of adversarial nations around the globe. But as the president spoke of his perceived successes tonight, he continues to cede economic power and technological strength to Russia, bow down to China, bow down to a Russian dictator, and make plans for war with Iran. Here's the truth. Over the last year, through DOGE, mass firings, and the appointment of deeply unserious people to our nation's most serious positions, our president has endangered the long and storied history of the United States of America being a force for good. So I'll ask again, is the president working to keep Americans safe, both at home and abroad? We all know the answer is no. In his speech tonight, the president did what he always does. He lied, he scapegoated, and he distracted. And he offered no real solutions to our nation's pressing challenges, so many of which he is actively making worse. He tries to divide us. He tries to enrage us, to pit us against one another, neighbor against neighbor. And sometimes he succeeds. And so you have to ask, who benefits from his rhetoric, his policies, his actions, the short list of laws he's pushed through this Republican Congress? Somebody must be benefiting. He's enriching himself, his family, his friends. The scale of the corruption is unprecedented. There's the cover-up of the Epstein files, the crypto scams, cozying up to foreign princes for airplanes and billionaires for ballrooms, putting his name and face on buildings all over our nation's capital. This is not what our founders envisioned, not by a long shot. So I'll ask again, is the president working for you? We all know the answer is no. But here's the special thing about America. On our 250th anniversary, we know better than any nation what is possible when ordinary citizens, like those who once dreamed right here in this room, reject the unacceptable and demand more of their government. We see it in the determination of students organizing school walkouts all across the country, whose voices are becoming so powerful that the governor of Texas seeks to silence them. We see it in the bravery of Americans in Minnesota standing up for their communities, from peacefully protesting in sub-zero temperatures to carpooling children to school so that their immigrant parents are not ripped away from them in the parking lot. As a mother of 3 school-aged daughters, I am inspired by their bravery, but I am sickened that it is necessary. And Americans across the country are taking action. They are going to the ballot box to reject this chaos. With their votes, they are writing a new story, a more hopeful story. In November, I won my election by 15 points. And we won 13 new seats in our state legislature. because voters decided they wanted something different. Our campaign earned votes from Democrats, Republicans, independents, and everyone in between, because they knew as citizens they could demand more, that they could vote for what they believe matters, and that they didn't need to be constrained by a party or political affiliation. This is happening across the country. New Jersey elected Mikey Sherrill as governor in a double-digit victory. Democrats flipped state legislative seats in places like Georgia, Iowa, Mississippi, and Texas. The list goes on and on. Ordinary Americans are stepping up to run in the spirit of our forefathers. They are running to demand more and to do more for their neighbors and communities. I know this story well. I first ran for office in 2018 alongside dozens of other Democrats who did the seemingly impossible, flipping 41 seats in Congress. In my case, I was the first Democrat elected in 50 years, swinging our district 17 points. Those who are stepping up now to run will win in November because Americans, you at home, know you can demand more, and that we are working to lower costs. We are working to keep our communities and our country safe, and we are working for you. In his farewell address, George Washington warned us about the possibility of, quote, cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men rising to power. But he also encouraged us, all Americans, to unite in a common cause, to move this nation forward. That is our charge once more, and that is what we are seeing across the country. It is deeply American and patriotic to do so, and it is how we ensure that the state of our union remains strong, not just this year, but for the next 250 years as well, because we, the people, have the power to make change, the power to stand up for what is right, the power to demand more of our nation. May God bless the Commonwealth of Virginia, and may God bless the United States of America.
Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger delivering the Democratic response to President Trump's State of the Union address. Amy Walter, that's a pretty clear strategy from Democrats there to take what have been winning issues for this president, immigration, the economy, and turn them into liabilities.
Absolutely. She also embodied what is another message we're seeing within the Democratic Party right now, which is this idea of having a fighter. This was not somebody who came in saying, well, we should probably compromise or we should work together. This was somebody who came in clearly and said, this is a party, as a party, we should go against President Trump, even on issues like immigration. The president spent time talking about immigration in the past, open borders, danger during the time that Biden was president. She is focused now on the actions of the federal enforcement of these immigration laws, which are unpopular.
We also heard the president mention a few foreign policy moments. He held up his highlights. For that, I want to turn to our Nick Schifrin, who was following both the president's address and also what we just heard from Governor Spanberger. And Nick, to that point, we were all waiting to see if the president would mention anything more specific on Iran and new potential strikes. He only mentioned the previous strikes. Governor Spanberger there said he is now making plans for war with Iran. What stood out to you?
Well, the president certainly has war plans if he wants to use them, Amna, as you and I have been talking about over the last few months. What stood out is three things that the president laid out in his speech. That is Iran's nuclear capacity. He used a phrase, at this moment, again, pursuing their sinister nuclear ambitions. The U.S. has not made that evidence public, although Steve Witkoff has talked about high-level enrichment that has to come down in the nuclear talks. Number two, the president accused Iran of working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States. That's from a defense intelligence assessment. And also the death toll, 32,000 killed in those protests, much higher than most activists believe, or at least have said publicly. Combined, clearly, Amna, trying to paint the regime in Iran as something that he could target if he decides. And, of course, that big military buildup will give him that opportunity in the days or weeks to come.
We have time now for some final thoughts. Vaz Shakir, we'll start with you.
Well, we're living in a time of corruption. I agree with the president on that. Obviously, he has enriched himself by $4 billion. I think the opportunity for many Democrats, many people in this country are looking for integrity. Of people who run for office who say they're going to do a thing and then believe that when they get in office, don't kowtow to the rich, but feel like they operate for the American public. So I think heading into the midterm elections, I feel bullish about the Democrats' chances.
For those keeping score at home, no mention of DOGE tonight. If we go back a year ago, that was a big signature policy for the president and the White House. The only person who mentioned DOGE tonight was actually Abigail Spanberger in her response. So I think that was interesting. They probably see that the cuts to a lot of big spending programs that are important for Americans, they see that as an asset now.
Yeah. President Trump did talk about fraud, though, and the billions of fraud that have been exposed in Minneapolis. And I think it's interesting that they chose Spanberger because she campaigned as a moderate, and she's doing quite the opposite. So I think she will have a hard time really delivering on what she shared tonight because she seems to be a Trojan horse for the far left policies that are selling to the Democrats. That's sort of like what their vision for the future is. And so it'll be interesting to see how she governs.
Support journalism you trust. Support PBS News. Donate now, or even better, start a monthly contribution today.